Welcome to Minister Scott Fielding from Manitoba. How are you doing today, sir?
I'm doing pretty good. How about yourself?
It's all good here in Ottawa. Feels like winter is upon us, and I'm very glad you could join us. You were here with us in person in New York last year in the before times. Can you walk us through what has happened in the province between then and say March when the world kind of turned upside down?
Yeah, well, absolutely. The world has changed quite a bit. The big focal point for our government, really, since being elected about 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago, was to fix the finances of the province of Manitoba. And we are making pretty good ground in terms of balancing our budget. In fact, we had kind of an 8-year plan to balance it. And so we actually finished about 4 years ahead of schedule. So pleased to report through our public accounts, which is kind of our year end, that we actually finished with a small surplus. And so we anticipated about a $365 million deficit at the beginning of the year, and we finished with a $5 million surplus. And that was really made up of a number of different areas in terms of expenditure reductions or savings, as well as growth in terms of the economy, which was really good, our income tax and personal income tax, as well as corporate taxes, and maintaining expenditures.
And then March happened, and the virus hit, and things changed. Can you talk about the immediate impact and what has happened since?
Well, yeah, we were in a situation where we actually, when we released our budget for the year, it was really about the middle of March. So the virus, obviously had an impact really around that same time period. So the budget that we introduced, we were going to show about a $220 million deficit. Since then, because of the global pandemic that everyone's facing, we've taken on additional, obviously, expenditures. We have something called the Parliamentary Budget Office, which is kind of an independent third party that evaluates how governments make expenditures. And we've actually made investments, probably second or third highest amongst the provinces in terms of supports for people as well as businesses during the pandemic. And so those are really important to Manitobans to make sure the supports are in place. Manitoba, for the most part, our numbers have been climbing, in a second wave, of course, that we're seeing come across really the country and other areas. But for the most part, our numbers have been a lot lower than the other provinces that are a lot bigger than Manitoba. And our economic return has been pretty good. Stats Canada, that kind of evaluates how we're doing, suggests that Manitoba is on track to rebound the best of all the provinces with the second lowest unemployment rate. So those are areas that we've had to deal with, and all governments are doing that. A lot of new expenditures to support businesses and individuals. We're going to lose about $1.5 billion in revenues. That's based off a $17 billion budget, and we're also going to make important investments again that third parties are suggesting is some of the highest in the country.
Scotiabank has an updated set of provincial forecasts out this morning, and they are saying that Manitoba looks to be in a position to come out of this recession relatively unscathed. How did you accomplish that, and what differentiates the province from the others across Canada?
Well, I think some of the hard work initially we did over the first 4 years, getting our finances back into balance, is really important. We also have what we call a rainy day fund, and it's a fund to address any kind of residual emergency issues. Best practices suggest you should have anywhere between 5 to 15%. So it was drained prior to us coming to office, and we replenished that to about over $800 million. So we think that's going to bode us well to address a lot of the future concerns. And we think a lot of the programming that we put in place to support individuals and businesses has really helped. Things like kind of a GAP program, if there wasn't funding at the federal level for different initiatives, kind of a wage subsidy program to allow businesses to hire people on, a program to support essential workers, maybe the people that are working in grocery stores, you name it, to support them throughout the process. And a real big push to have youth employment kind of incentives for businesses to hire them on, we think has really helped us. And again, if you look at some of the numbers that places like Stats and some of the forecasting agencies are suggesting that Manitoba, you're right, is on track to have one of the best rebounds in the country, if not the best. We anticipate, GDP to drop just under 5%. We do it based on the 9 forecasting agencies. But next year, we're going to see a rebound. We anticipate close to 5% as well. So, you know, our focal point for the government is to protect Manitobans, and number two is make sure the economy is recharged and people are ready to go. And so far, for the most part, it's been an effective program, and businesses and individuals have had the support they need during the time of crisis.
You mentioned that you're seeing cases tick up as we enter a second wave. What kind of risks would a second wave pose to your outlook going forward?
Well, you know, as Manitoba, the way when everyone shut down in March, our shutdown was a little bit not as comprehensive, I guess I would say, as others. So we shut down kind of later on than other provinces, and we were able to reopen a lot quicker, and that boded us well for the economy. But there's no question that will be an issue going forward. We anticipate more of a target approach more than kind of a total shutdown as we move forward with these things. We want to make sure people like seniors in personal care homes are protected. We've got a mandate in Manitoba now to have everyone wear masks and do the social distancing that everyone is talking about. So we want to make sure individuals are protected, and specifically vulnerable populations. Where we are seeing an uptick in some of the numbers, and we have over the last number of days, is more the kind of the 20 to 29-year-old kind of segment that are more susceptible, probably going to some of the bars and restaurants. So we've also scaled back the time that they're open. That's a part of it. But we think with a lot of the measures, the health-related public health measures we've taken will, number one, protect our citizens in a way that makes sense. And again, even if you look at other jurisdictions, the numbers that we've had in terms of mortality and being in personal care homes, getting COVID in personal care homes has been a lot less than other jurisdictions. And even from we're living in a global world, of course, with North Dakota, which is kind of our immediate neighbor. It's about half the size. They have about 10 times the amount of cases as well as mortality rate. So we think that the health measures are important, and more of a target approach will allow us to get to the other side and making sure the businesses are there and prospering, and making sure the supports don't be, especially these times, afraid to make investments to support businesses so people aren't going out of business, and jobs are there for all Manitobans. So that's really our strategy. Every day is a new scenario that you got to take in consideration. We really tried to follow the science with a lot of our approaches for public health, and also make sure that you consult businesses. How can you maintain your business in a way that's safe for individuals? And so we take great pride in the fact that we consulted with a lot of these businesses of how to maintain the economy while protecting Manitobans.
And what about your borrowing requirements? This is obviously a fixed income conference, and our viewers are interested in anything that you will be offering in terms of debt. What's it looking like going forward?
Well, our debt was made up for the most part when we started the year prior to the pandemic happening. I think it was around $5.6 billion was our program. We anticipate that's upwards of $9 billion now. A part of that, obviously, is some of the programming that we're doing to support to Manitobans. There is also the capital requirement that we would normally use with some of the programs. Part of our what we call the Manitoba Restart program is enhancements in spending and infrastructure, right, to boost the economy. That obviously plays into some of the debt financing that we're doing, as well as some of our hydroelectricity programs. We're at the very end of two major dam projects, or a number of dam projects. Manitoba is a very clean and green province, and so with these dam, it will be good for the long term for the province, but they certainly are expensive to do. And so we're working through that. That really is made up of our debt program for the year.
And you mentioned the federal government and the supports they've offered. Can you just talk a bit about how it's been working with Ottawa? And if you were in the Prime Minister's shoes or Mr. Freeland's shoes, is there anything you would be doing differently federally?
Well, we've worked closely with the federal government. We have, as ministers of finance, and the federal minister of finance have weekly or bi-weekly now calls to make sure we're kind of aligned in terms of the approach we're taking. So I think for the most part, all governments in terms of the fiscal and monetary policies of all governments have done a pretty good job through this process to providing supports. The federal government had a program called the SERP program that supports people that would be there. They had a wage subsidy program to allow kind of the employers to keep the employees on their books essentially to make sure that's there. They're providing some sick leave aspects. They're providing monies to the provinces to support healthcare and other types of initiatives. So I think those are really important, and I think for the most part they've gotten it right. Now, my only concern with that is that you need a plan to get yourself out of deficit. I think a lot of people, all governments in the world, are investing a lot of money to support people and businesses right now, and you absolutely have to do that. But I think you also need a long-term plan to get yourself into balance. You can't just continue to run a $343 billion deficit, 10 times what it was initially supposed to be or more, without a plan to get ourselves out of deficit. So from a Manitoba perspective, in our throne speech, which kind of outlines our plan for the year, we put together a plan to get ourselves back on track. We were able to, again, balance the budget, but we want to make sure we have a plan to get ourselves back into balance. And if you don't have a plan, then you certainly aren't going to make some headway on that. So I know Minister Freeland, who's the new Minister of Finance, will be giving an economic update later on this month. So what we would really like to see from the federal government is that plan to get themselves back into a balanced situation. Once the COVID crisis comes, we're through it.
One of the corollaries to the pandemic has been closed borders and travel restrictions, which has brought immigration to a near halt. That obviously has some impacts on Canada's long-term growth. What impact is that having in Manitoba?
Well, Manitoba has got a very proud tradition or program. It's called the Business Nominee Program. So it matches kind of the needs of immigration with the labor force here. So we work pretty much hand in hand with the business community to find out what needs there is. And so we have immigration is kind of catered towards that. So Manitoba is still one of the smaller provinces, 1.5 billion or 1.3 billion in terms of the population. But for the most part, we're averaging about 16,000 immigrants on a yearly basis, which is kind of higher than our 10-year average. I think it's about the second highest in the country on a per capita basis. But no question, with the restrictions that COVID had, I believe our applications are down by about 45% for this year. Now, we have to see, as the world's waiting on things like vaccines and everything else that's there, we need to make sure that commerce doesn't stop, and you do have immigration that's so important to the Manitoba and Canadian economy still happens. But certainly it is down this year. We anticipate, and our goal, in fact, in our throne speech, which is our plan for the year that we introduce, identifies immigration needs to be a big priority for that. So we would like to obviously get back to those pre-pandemic levels once we're through the pandemic, or there's a vaccine, it's safer to travel and to have less restrictions on Canadians and Manitobans.
In addition to a vaccine, one of the other big things the world is watching these days is the U.S. election. And we've got a question from the audience here on what do you think a Biden presidency mean for Manitoba?
Well, Manitoba, for the most part, is a trading province. So I think as Canadians, we always look at different initiatives to make sure that there's a robust market that's out there. We're watching with everyone else. There's pros and cons to both of the particular parties. I guess from a Canadian perspective, we want to make sure that free trade is a staple and is a part of it. So whether it's President Biden or President Trump, we want to make sure that trade is the utmost importance to our local economy here and to the Canadian economy. One thing that is really important too, it's interprovincial trade. If you look at the governor of the Bank of Canada, what he indicates is that GDP growth could be exponentially grown by just allowing interprovincial trade to be more reticent, and that's something our premier has really made a priority for him. So we're waiting to see who is elected in the United States, and we're going to work with whomever's there. But trade would be our biggest request from each of the candidates.
One thing that the federal government is watching in the election, should Joe Biden win, is the impact on energy projects like Keystone XL. He, of course, has vowed to kill it. Which brings me to sort of the other big global crisis, climate change. Your government has not been the biggest fan of the Trudeau effort to impose a carbon tax across the country. Can you talk a bit about Manitoba's approach to the environment and to sustainable finance as well?
Well, we think, and we're very proud of the fact that we think we've got the best green plan of all the provinces right now. And Manitoba, for maybe some of the viewers that don't know Manitoba, we have hydroelectricity, a clean and green energy source. We've got a number of dams that are being constructed right now or have been constructed. And so it's obviously a renewable energy that's really important. So we've got a good track record in terms of this as a province, and that's been something for generations going on. We do also really promote kind of our green initiatives. We've got something called a conservation trust. We put some significant amounts of money in something called a conservation trust. It's about a $103 million fund, and there's a grow trust. And what that does, it promotes wetland, and enhancements of conservation through wetlands, and that's done either through a public sector and or through private means. And so we think that will help things in Manitoba. It's set up kind of like an endowment fund. So on a financial basis, it makes a lot of sense. We do initial investment in trust, and then obviously every year the interest pays for a lot of programs that are in place. We also have one of the biggest construction projects in our history, the North End Water Treatment Plant in our major city in Winnipeg. That's well over $1 billion project, and it feeds the city of Winnipeg. The wastewater feeds into our biggest lake, Lake Winnipeg, rather. And so we've made significant investments with the city of Winnipeg and the federal government to support different things like that. Also, different smaller initiatives like banning plastic bags, we think is there, which are smaller things, but I think it's something that people can do on an everyday basis that really help things. Also, Manitoba is one of the leading provinces in biodiesel in terms of kind of the safer and more sustainable, biodiesel grades, I guess if I would say, that we think will make a big difference for Manitobans. So we're very proud of the green plan that we have in place and really our history of hydroelectricity, the clean green energy. And so we'd like to build upon that to make our streams and our waterways a little bit cleaner. I think everyone, no matter what political stripe you are, wants to make sure we're leaving the environment and our world a little better off than we came into it.
I guess maybe the last question here as we wind down time. One of the things the federal government has rolled out is sort of a retooling of the Canada Infrastructure Bank with some green priorities like energy retrofits, but also agricultural irrigation. Does Manitoba have any interest in partnering with the Infrastructure Bank on anything agricultural or in the energy sector?
Yeah, we've got our priorities, and we've been meeting consistently with the federal government on this. We think, especially in a crisis like this, infrastructure is an important endeavor. They've put together certain different categories, some being kind of environmentally wastewater types of initiatives. That's a big priority for us. The concern that we may have with the federal government, to a certain extent, is the approval process. There's kind of an environmental approval process, and so whether you're doing some oil and gas type of projects, it's harder to get approvals through the federal and provincial systems. We're in a situation living in low floodplains here in Manitoba. We get floods quite often. And so we've been building as an outlet channel that will basically allow flood protection to happen. And so it's been kind of marred by some delays, some caused by extensive consultation that the federal government has dictated to us. And it's been kind of a contentious point with a lot of the provinces with the federal government. But we want to continue to work with the federal government to get a lot of these types of projects done on an infrastructure basis. That's good for our economy, and if we can focus on other things like trade-related infrastructure is really important to Manitoba because we're in the middle of the country. You can have planes, trains, and automobiles that come and can route products for services throughout the country. So that's really a competitive advantage we have. So anytime the federal government wants to partner in those types of initiatives, it's something that our government really looks at seriously, and we're we're absolutely wanted to commit money from a provincial level because we think that it's going to drive commerce. It's going to be good for the Manitoba economy. It's going to be good for the Canadian economy.
Excellent. Well, Minister Fielding, we've got just a few seconds left here, so I want to thank you. Any last parting thoughts you have for our audience?
No, it was fantastic to be with the group last year. Hopefully next year we'll be in a better place with a vaccine. And, I think all governments on a fiscal and monetary policy are doing relatively good. There could be different policies that are in place, but for the most part, I think, we're trying to support Canadians and Manitobans in so many different ways that hopefully will make a difference for Manitobans. So I want to thank you for allowing me to come here and speak and tell the Manitoba story.